Welcome back to the Gaming News Canada show. I'm your host, Steve McAllister. A little more than a year ago, online game supplier Play & Go announced a partnership with Loto-Quebec and became a member of the Canadian Gaming Association. At the end of 2024, PointsBet Canada came on board as a Play & Go partner. A year ago at the Canadian Gaming Summit, we caught up with Saam, the company's regional director North America, and the company's head of government affairs, Shawn Fluharty, during the Canadian Gaming Summit. Last month, Play & Go was a sponsor of the G7 Canada Brain Economy Summit's inaugural Global Forum on Responsible Gaming and Gambling Policy. Fluharty, who is also the president of the National Council of Legislators from government states and the minority whip for the West Virginia House of Delegates, was among the participants in that forum. So we figured the time was right to bring back Shawn and Saam for a conversation on what's happening in the business of gambling on both sides of the border, including the U.S., with a discussion on prediction markets, illegal operators, cannibalization, sweepstakes, tax rates, and responsible gaming has been as heated as the recent wave of high temperatures around us. With that, Saam and Shawn, welcome back to the podcast.
Steve, thanks for having us. It's always great to talk to you and just talk all things Canada.
Hey, Saam, maybe just before I ask Shawn about the G7 summit, before I hit the record button, we were talking about the Canadian Gaming Summit, and you and I bumped into each other several times that week back in June, and we're just talking. Obviously, there's a lot of coverage of what's going on in the U.S. right now. We're going to get into that a little bit later with you and Shawn. But it just felt like the Canadian Gaming Summit just reinforces the fact of the importance of bringing the industry together in Canada and having those conversations about what's going on in the Canadian gaming industry, especially in light of what's happening in Alberta right now. And we're now 3+ years in the Ontario market. And I think there's also lots of interest of what regulated gambling is going to look like in the other provinces over the next decade.
Well, Steve, we were talking about it previously, and just for everyone to know, the Canadian Gaming Summit, I think, is probably my favorite conference that I attend, because it has all the major players in the market in Canada coming to one central location, and everybody being able to talk and being able to educate each other and have really meaningful, impactful conversations about what the future of the gaming market in Canada looks like. And, it's not about how many people attend. It's about having the right people attend. And that's absolutely what the Canadian Gaming Summit is. And we're really excited for what's ahead to come in the market. It's been very chaotic in North America. Shawn can attest to and get into a little bit about what's going on in the U.S. As what we're seeing. But we're kind of full steam ahead in our presence in Ontario. You mentioned that we've been now over 1 year now partners with Loto-Quebec in Quebec, and we're incredibly happy with what we're seeing. Every month we're breaking performance from the previous month, and they're just a great partner to work with. And in Ontario, we've now hit 30 operators of the roughly 50 that are in the market, and we're in talks with several more operators to go live with as well. So, and it's also a big shout out goes to our leadership group for placing the importance of the Canadian market, because we wouldn't have been able to have this much focus on the market if it wasn't for our leadership.
Hey, Shawn, Saam mentions the chaos in North America right now. I just wonder how I guess on a grade of 1 to 10, how would you score the chaos in Canada compared to the U.S. right now?
Oh, those are calm waters in Canada compared to the U.S. right now. That's for sure. And Steve, thanks again for having us. Look, we've had great experience in Canada thus far. And as you mentioned, we're going to talk about the G7. Alberta was a great host. And, compared to the U.S. right now with the prediction markets, the sweeps, and other things going on, it's a bit of a chaos south of the border there in Canada. But I'm happy to discuss that and looking forward to it today.
Hey, Shawn, in terms of Alberta, and Dale Nally spoke at the Canadian Gaming Summit, and I think people were a little disappointed that the minister's speech was maybe a little light when it came to meat on the proverbial bone. But just what we know, the kind of the role of the operators, and that there are lobbyists behind the operators. But for a supplier like Play & Go, what's your role with with on that path to regulated gambling in Alberta?
Well, Minister Nally, who has the greatest title in the history of politics, the Minister of Red Tape Reduction. Does it get any better than that title? I don't think so. And I have great respect for him. And I get what people are saying about the light on the details. But if you look at what Alberta is doing, it's actually the right way to do it. So they move what I would call enabling legislation. And that's enabling legislation allows for the legislation to get through the process. And then on the back end, the details, as you're talking about, or get filled in after stakeholder meetings and after due diligence is done. Many times we see provinces or here in the States, they rush legislation. They throw a bunch of stuff by statute in on the front end. And then what happens is you have to go correct errors after the fact. So I think what Minister Nally is doing is actually the right approach. Let's get the enabling legislation through. Let's work with stakeholders, industry folks, and responsible gambling folks, get them all together, and let's get it right the first time instead of going back and correcting errors. But I get the point that, hey, we'd like to hear more details on the front end, but I'm telling you, as far as due diligence goes, they're doing their due diligence. And I'm looking forward to Alberta being a great response here and having the right type of legislation. And our role is no different than really anybody else's. We have things that we like to see in legislation, as do many others. And there's many things that the industry within that umbrella agrees on. There's things that we don't agree on. But at the end of the day, we need everybody pulling the rope together. And I think that's the goal here. And I think it's something you're seeing in the U.S. There's a bit of a fracture going on within the industry. And look, Play and Go has positioned itself as a supplier that's a thought leader, that's leading conversations. That's why we were at G7. We are not afraid to step out of the comfort zone and have those conversations, whether it's in Alberta or anybody else. We're going to be at the front of the line.
And I think some, in fairness to Minister Nally too, the Alberta situation is, I think, a little more complex in Ontario, where you have the Indigenous nations are a lot more involved in gaming. There's obviously, I think, a different land-based casino element to legalize gambling in Alberta. And to Shawn's point, I think there are some things that can be put in place, and there's still a lot of there's still disappointment that Ontario still doesn't have a central self-exclusion program across the industry in the province. And so I think there is a chance for Alberta to take some lessons learned from what we saw in Ontario at launch and make sure they do get it right when they finally do launch.
Yeah, and we're looking at that from a business perspective too. We want it to go the right way. We don't want anybody or any jurisdiction to rush into opening up their market, because that's going to create chaos for the business interests, from whether it's the operator partners or us on the supplier end. Everything needs to be laid out. Everything needs to be clear what the regulations look like, so everybody's respective teams can plan accordingly. Right now it's a busy time around the world for new markets opening up in the regulated space. Every year there's multiple new markets coming online, and the worst thing to do is to rush into it and do something without any thought towards it. And I was echoing what Shawn said. I think it's great that they're taking the time and taking the steps to look at it from a whole holistic angle on what the market in Alberta is going to look like. And what you said, Steve, that the interests of the land base are very relevant. The interests from the First Nations are very relevant, and everybody's opinions need to be heard to get this done the right way.
Yeah, and Shawn, Paul Burns from the Canadian Gaming Association made the same point you did, that the iGaming Alberta Act is deliberately, is fairly broad-based in the language, so that you don't have to go back and, once the market does open up, and try to amend legislation, which is a lot tougher road to hoe, as I'm sure you see in your position in West Virginia, and then in your role Play and Go.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's the real issue here, is that legislative process is hard. It's difficult to get a bill passed. Usually in the U.S., it's a 2 to 4 year stretch, and that's for stuff that actually people agree on. So, these are things that it's a very you need to have your due diligence, and he's absolutely spot on. So say that we pass a bill and we put it in code, a multi-layered issue. It's easy to put like tax code in code and things of that nature. But we were talking about responsible gambling, and you're talking about things that could change with technology on a daily basis. the legislature does not change as fast, right? Things move very slowly. So put that on the regulatory side so that we can go in and fix these things as they come up versus going through the statutory code, which takes a long time. So there is a reason behind the madness. Like there's a reason they're doing it this way. And I agree with Paul Burns. Paul Burns is a friend of mine. He is a great leader in Canada, and you are in good hands with him. He's a friend of Play and Go, and he's a friend of quite frankly, the States. He was down here speaking last week at the NCLGS conference. So Paul Burns, certainly he knows what's going on. And if he's in agreement and I'm in agreement, that's a good sign.
Saam, from a product standpoint, again, we talk about the podcast quite often that in Ontario with this, the customer base is very heavily skewed towards playing online casino games. It's about 85% of the market right now, I think, of the handle in Ontario is through iGaming. And it feels like companies such as Play and Go, it's almost like you're releasing new products on a weekly basis right now. And I just wonder how competitive is that environment? And are you also seeing any trends with the kind of games that customers want to play in a legal environment?
So it's a great question. And from a product standpoint, it's incredibly competitive. You have 40, 50, 60 suppliers in the market with 50 operators. And while the Ontario market is the largest market in terms of sheer population, there's only a finite number of players that can play in the space. So you have to have the cutting edge product, the product that captivates the players. And from our perspective, wants them to come back a second, third, fourth, and be loyal customers to Play and Go products. I'm sure every supplier has the same goal as well. So one of the things that we look at is creating loyalty in the IP. And so we have our series of games, like we have our Dead series, for instance, that's been around, our flagship internal brand that we have, that it's recognizable by the players. And think of it as a Netflix movie that they have the sequel or the third iteration of the trilogy movie. That's what we have in a way, but we always try to learn from the previous games, what mechanics work, what didn't work, what can we improve on, and incorporate that into the second, third, fourth version of that game. And that's what creates the loyalty. And we learn from even our misses too, because honestly, there are some games that just don't work, whether it's a theme, the mechanics, but if we want to take a step back and look at the failures as well, we can gain a lot from those failures too. And we do that at Play and Go. We look at what doesn't work and we apply it to our next game. You have to have that short-sighted mentality a little bit in order to just pick the lessons that you want to and move forward.
Saam, I've long said that Quebec's a very unique market and that it's a unique province, a unique culture. I'm assuming that also applies to the gaming industry. I just wonder, have you seen anything in the relationship with Loto-Quebec that kind of reinforces the fact that a Quebec customer is different from an Ontario customer, that's different from a customer in other jurisdictions?
I mean, I think we have to always have the mindset that every customer is different in each jurisdiction. I mean, so yeah, there are subtle differences between Quebec and Ontario and the players there versus even in the US and in Europe. But I think that's a mindset you have to have going in. If you treat every potential player as the same across the board, you're doomed to fail. So our team, I think, does a really good job in looking at each market and tailoring what we can to make it work for that jurisdiction. So yes, we do release games on a global level. We make our games available across the world, but we make tweaks to even the things, even the little details such as the bet levels and things like that to cater to the specific population. And also in our games development roadmap, we have specific markets in mind when it comes toward development. And so Canada, when it comes to development in whether it's Ontario or Quebec, our game producers are always thinking about, okay, maybe this game is better suited for the Ontario market and the players are going to be resonating with this game more than they would in Michigan, for instance, in the US. So we have to have that mindset that every player is different.
Hey, Shawn, you've been piling up the frequent flyer points. We missed you in Toronto at the Canadian Gaming Summit, but you were in Calgary the week before that for the G7 Canada Brain Economy Summit, and the decision by that group to dig into responsible gambling and gaming policy. Can you maybe just spend a few minutes and just talk about your role at that conference, some of the takeaways you had, and what the next steps are?
Absolutely. It was a great opportunity. Really, Steve, thinking back on it, it's probably the first conversation of its magnitude when you talk about the brain economy, the global economy, the digitized economy. And these conversations always happen in the past, but never did you have regulated gambling and have a seat at the table. And it was an honor to represent Play and Go and lead that process. And we're not done. Look, we're just getting started. The G7, the brain economy, brought in neuroscientists, those from the addiction community, and those who aren't particularly part of the conversation. And what we realize is, in order to have an entertainment-based sustainable gambling model, whether it be in Canada or the US or globally, it's going to require everybody to participate. And this was the first opportunity for that type of conversation, which will lead to better policy, sustainable policy. And Play and Go prides itself on not targeting individuals. We believe in an entertainment model. We don't do things like direct bonus buys that our competitors do, quite frankly. And we leave money on the table because of that, but we don't participate in predatory practices. And these are things that the conversation has to happen. So,
Shawn, sorry, I didn't mean to cut off, but I think it's important for the audience to know what exactly direct bonus buys are. So if you want to explain that, or if you want me to explain that, I think it'll be.
Go ahead, Saam. It's your wheelhouse on that.
Well, so I think it's just important for the audience, anybody who's listening, just to understand what that mechanic actually is and why it's considered predatory in our opinion. So the way direct bonus buys work is, figure you have a slot game, you're playing a game online, and you have a big flashing light at you that's clamoring for you to press it to bet a large sum of money to directly bypass the main game and go into the bonus level. Now, in theory, it may sound appealing, but think about it from a long-term perspective of the player. You're not guaranteed to win every time you go into the bonus level. And we try to make our games as entertaining as we can during the course of the normal gameplay. It's that we don't have to rely just on the bonus to provide the entertainment value. So imagine you're a player, you get enticed to push that button, and you go into the bonus level. You say bet $100 to bypass the game, and to go into the bonus level, and you make $50. That's a large amount of wager that you just pressed just to have the chance of maybe winning a big amount. And let's say you keep doing it again and again and again, you're going to get blood dry as the player. And that's going to create that negative experience that the player is going to get turned off by playing the game and perhaps may not want to play again. So it's kind of, I always like to use this analogy that I'm a big football fan, and Shawn is too. So we both like this. Imagine playing every game as if you're at the 1 yard line, and the only play that you have is just to get 1 yard into the end zone. That's what a direct bonus buy is. And if anybody who's a true football fan knows, the game is played between the 20s. And that's how we approach it with direct bonus buy. And we really view it as just robbing the players of a good overall experience.
And Steve, Saam failed to mention that his favorite team is the Carolina Panthers, and they fail to score on a regular basis. So if anybody knows about not getting in the end zone, it's definitely Saam. So
why did you have to do that to me on a
anyway,
podcast?
I do want to add, Steve, as for next steps, which you asked about originally, we are now. I will be chairing a committee of global experts, essentially, going forward to put forward what we would consider to be the best practices and policy on responsible gambling going forward. And Play and Go is going to have not only a seat at the table, but we're going to be part of the committee itself as I'm chairing it. And we're going to have experts from across the field. And as I said, we're not done. The G7 was not the only stop along this train. We're going down the tracks, and we're heading next to the United Nations in September in New York City. So these conversations with experts are ongoing. And as I said previously, this is the first type of conversation where we're bringing everybody into the fold. And I think that's good for everybody. It's good if you're on the responsible gambling side. It's good if you are, as we had many medical experts who are now looking at gambling as part of the global economy. And then also for the industry itself, that we can't pretend that these things don't exist. And if we're going to actually have a sustainable entertainment model, it's going to require these conversations to take place. Not the old school gambling ways and backroom deals and smoke-filled rooms. We're talking about bringing it transparency out in the open on the policy itself. That's exactly what we're trying to do.
Hey, Shawn, I just wonder, I think sometimes when it just conversations that I have with people outside the industry at the golf course in the summer with family, there's certainly a lack of understanding around regulated gaming versus offshore / illegal gaming. And I'm just wondering, those conversations that you have in Calgary and other conversations, do you find that these, global experts, as you call them, do they understand what the industry is about? Do they kind of get that there is a legal gambling industry, or were you surprised by any of the conversations that you had in Calgary?
Steve, I think you nailed it. That's the number one issue facing our industry and the global economy when we bring that conversation in, is that they don't, first off, if it's illegal, they think it doesn't exist, which we all know it does. And secondly, they don't understand just how broad it is. So there's this huge education gap, whether it's lawmakers on the ground or the experts in the field that haven't necessarily brought into the gambling realm. There's a huge education gap. So if you're on the golf course with family members, or you're quite literally in a legislative session, the conversation is very similar, right? Because there's this education gap that exists. And many times when I'm in legislative hallways here in the U.S., what I'll do is I'll actually bring up my phone and say, I was able to go onto a website that you think is illegal, register, and start playing. And guess what you're getting out of that? Absolutely nothing. You're not protecting the consumer. You're not getting any revenue and tax dollars whatsoever, yet it's easily available. Nobody's going to prison for it. It's not like the U.S. attorneys are striking down on these companies. That's why they're running rampant, and they're really an affront to the law. And so what we need to do by having a global policy initiative in place is realize it's not going anywhere. Let's get it done the right way, and let's regulate it. And that's what it is. But you're absolutely right, Steve. It's all about educating not just the consumer and the participant within that realm, but those who are responsible for making the laws, adhering to the laws, and putting the regulatory practices in place on the back end.
I'll ask both of you guys this. I think to that point, Shawn, one of the challenges right now is on responsible gambling, because it just feels like there's so many organizations. And again, I probably have beaten this one to death, but I think it's an important question to ask with you guys on the podcast, is that there's so many organizations out there touting responsible gaming, from the operators to the regulators to companies like Play and Go to the Responsible Online Gaming Association in the U.S., the Responsible Gambling Council in here in Canada. The Provincial Lottery and Gaming Associations, OLG and BCLC, as you both know, have been leaders with their RG programs. And then, the conversation I had with Harry Levant on the podcast last week, and Harry comes out at it as a public health advocate. How do you? And again, this might be an unfair question, but how do you get to a place with all these different voices to having consistent, clear-cut messaging around responsible gambling, so that people understand what responsible gambling is, that there's a commitment to it, and at the same time that people that do need help or do need access to gambling prevention measures can get that?
I'll take that. So, look, Steve, here's what I think doesn't get talked about enough. Now, you're absolutely correct. There are many different organizations. They all do great work, and it's kind of, you're pulling in many different directions. Here's what I think good policy looks like. It includes our education sector, which largely has been left out. And what I mean by that is the university setting. Many universities, for instance, West Virginia University here is an R1 institution. We have the ability to take that data, which is in this global economy, it's the new gold, right? It is that data available that we have as a supplier, that operators have, that your social media has. It knows more about you than you know about yourself at this point. But that data if we put it in the right hands, can be used for responsible gambling purposes at the legislative level. And what I mean by that is including our universities, our education sector into the conversation as well. We actually require that in the state of West Virginia through statute. Now, many other areas, that's not the case. But I think part of the conversation going forward is to include that.
Saam, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I was going to say from a business perspective, I think we have to self-police ourselves a little bit too, right? There's a lot of opinions and a lot of just insights that everybody has, but from a play and go perspective, at least, we self-police ourselves. We see what we can do to give the players the best, safe, responsible experience that they could possibly have while providing that entertainment. So as long as we look ourselves in the mirror and just try to be the best versions of ourselves and always have the player at heart, I think that's going to, and if everybody has that mindset too, I think that's going to go a long way towards pushing and promoting responsible gaming, because it should be talked about and a lot of people should have their opinions on this. So I'm glad that there is such a focus on this by so many different people.
Hey, Saam, go ahead, Shawn. You want?
No, I think that was background. But I would say I'll add that. So to Saam's point, policing yourself as a lawmaker, I can tell you when an industry says we don't need any regulations, we're going to police ourselves. That's a red flag. And Play and Go says we want more regulation. We like regulation. Why? Because we like sustainability and entertainment model, and we're looking years down the road. There's a reason why we're celebrating 20 years in operation this year. It's because we know what we're doing and we do it the right way. And many other companies cannot say that, quite frankly. So we love that idea of a sustainable model and more regulation. And the direct bonus buy example is a prime one. It's a predatory practice, we believe, but yet it's not something that's regulated. Regulators aren't telling us not to do that. We do it on our own. But we can't speak for the entire industry, and that's why real regulation is proper and welcomed.
And I guess, the thing is this, if we don't have regulated industry, gambling's not going to go away. I mean, it was around before PASPA was overturned. It was around before Bill C-218 passed here in Canada. We saw just last month where a court in Manitoba basically shut down Bodog. We see cease and desist letters coming out of Michigan right now from the Gaming Commission there against illegal operators. So I think it's important to just stress once again, guys, that it's naive for anybody that thinks that if you shut down, iGaming in Ontario or you shut it down in Pennsylvania and Michigan and other states across the U.S., that people are no longer going to gamble.
Yeah.
Steve, I was just going to say, Steve, it's back in the day about during the Prohibition era in the U.S. People were still finding a way how to drink, and a lot of irresponsible drinking was going on when you shut things down. So let's keep it in the hands of the responsible actors, and let's keep pushing the momentum forward in terms of instituting legalization and responsible gaming that comes with legalization.
Yeah, to your point, Steve, we talked about the education gap previously. Most consumers, it's hard to tell the difference. And we're running into that in the U.S. right now. And that's why you're seeing so many attorney generals sending subpoenas and then cease and desist letters like Michigan is doing. They're on the offensive against these companies who are operating illegally. But most consumers can't tell the difference. And so that's obviously why a regulated market is the successful path, because then you have a defense. If you have by statute iGaming on the books, you give your regulators, your attorney generals, the teeth they need to take action. Without that on the books, it's a different story. So that's the importance of a regulated market. It's not just protecting the consumers. It's about having the ability to go after the bad actors, allow the good actors to come in, protect your licensees, and target the bad actors. Without something on the books, it makes it much harder to target the bad actors.
Hey guys, that's a great segue, and obviously there's skin in the game for Play and Go here, and that's, there seems to have been a stalling to get regulated iGaming expanded beyond what the 6 or 7 states right now in the U.S. that have legal iGaming, and it just, talking to other people that cover the industry and talking to people within the industry, it just seems like that's going to be a harder nut to grab right now, given all the other stuff going on. And as I mentioned on the top, I mean, we'll get into this in a second, Shawn, about Kalshi appearing at the Nickel G conference last week, and what's going on in the U.S., California right now with daily fantasy, and there just seems to be so many issues out there that I don't know if is there a seat at the table for iGaming. And to your point, we know that in states beyond those 6 or 7 states, there are people playing online casino games with offshore operators. How do you guys see the state of play right now in trying to expand that iGaming market across the U.S.?
Well, I agree with you, Steve. There are a lot of fires out there, and the chaos that comes with the fires. You're not always on the offense. You're playing defense, and when you're playing defense, you're not exactly in the trenches trying to get things across the final stages for passage. However, I will say this: while we haven't had bills cross the finish line in the last year or two, what we have had are more bills introduced in states than ever before. So the appetite is there. And as I said at the onset, we look at about a 2 to 4 year window in most states. And take a state like Ohio right now. They had a previous committee put together last summer. They worked on legislation. They've introduced legislation in both the House and the Senate, and things are still moving. So I'm optimistic in Ohio and other areas where they're doing the same, like a state like Maryland. But at the same time, I have to mention that the industry itself has infighting going on, which is essentially slowing down the traction and the momentum that we had going. But a part of it also is the fact that this is not sports betting. Everybody knew, understood, and asked for sports betting. Your constituents were emailing you. They were talking to you about it. And you knew as a lawmaker, this needs to happen. It's a lot different with iGaming because most people are already playing, quite frankly, so they think it's legal. And secondly, they're not beating down the legislative doors asking for it because they already feel like it's available. So that's what really makes it complex on the passage side of things. So we can't really it's not really analogous to sports betting. However, I believe the infrastructure is in place for expansion. You're going to see it coming very soon in many states because not only do we have the infrastructure for it, but we have the appetite for it now that the education gap is slowly closing.
Hey, Saam, I just wonder in the conversations you have with operators, I mean, I'm sure you would rather be talking about product and innovation and the games that you produce, but I wonder how much of the conversations that you have are dominated by talk around regulation and licensing and trying to expand.
Well, I actually like talking about all the issues that we're having. It's pretty entertaining too, and I kind of am like Shawn that we don't run away from a good fight, I guess, when it comes to this, especially when it comes to something this important as imposing regulations and making sure that the right responsible actors are representing the industry well. And so it's obviously very much prevalent in any conversation that we have. That's the first conversation point I always feel like is, when's the next state coming online, or luckily we have Alberta coming online before any other state, it seems like, and it's that. So we do have a bit of positive momentum and some light to be seen with Alberta, but yeah, it's in the U.S. very much Kalshi and the sweepstakes have been dominating the headlines for the last year plus. And I would like to talk about games more, you're right. But personally, it's always fun too to talk about the people that aren't supposed to be in the industry that are giving us a bad name and doing what we can to make sure that they're out of the industry sooner than later.
Hey, Shawn, let's talk about Kalshi and you mentioned at the conference a lawyer who's been representing Kalshi in these cease and desist issues and defending Kalshi. And I just wonder if this doesn't get a lot of coverage up here in Canada because it doesn't seem to apply to us right now. Yes. But can you maybe just boil it down to layman's terms what the biggest issue operators have, and again, it does feel a little bit like the fact that Kalshi is arguing that the Commodity Trading Futures Commission is kind of positioned or aligned to regulate this industry seems to be a bit of a bone of contention. But maybe you can just walk our listeners through the whole issue here.
So Kalshi now has what I would call sports betting and many others available in all 50 states. Now they're using what I would consider a bit of a loophole and calling it a prediction market. And, from my perspective, in a layman's terms, I would say if it walks like a duck, talks like a duck, it's probably a duck. Now, and it's almost feels like sweeps 2.0 to a point. However, I will give Kalshi credit. They are challenging this in the courts. On the sweepstakes issue, state after state is going after sweepstakes companies, and not a single one is willing to walk into a courtroom and defend themselves. At least Kalshi is doing that. But really what it comes down to is a state sovereignty issue versus kind of the federal overreach. If you're a state that has passed sports betting, you've gone through the legislative process, you put the rules in place, you have a tax rate in place, you have licensees who have gone through this strenuous process, and you're seeing revenue from it. And now all of a sudden on the outside is this prediction market, which is infringing on the state's right to have their own sports betting laws on the books. And now they're taking revenue from your state. They're taking revenue from your licensees who have gone through this process. Obviously, it's going to become contentious. And that's exactly where we're at now. And it's going through the litigation process. There was actually a recent ruling. I'm an attorney by trade. I don't want to get in the weeds on the matter. But let's just say there was a ruling out of the Fourth Circuit. And right now there's a challenge coming from Maryland related to Kalshi. Well, there was a ruling in the Fourth Circuit out of West Virginia, of all places, that is going to have, I think, a big part in this conversation going forward, because now this new ruling which came out, which essentially said if the federal government doesn't explicitly state that they're covering this certain area, therefore the state has the right to kind of police themselves on this. And you could argue that explicitly the CFTC has not stated that sports betting, aka this new venture we're going into, was explicitly given to the CFTC. In other words, if it's not explicit, then it's in a gray area and it goes back to the states. And so that's kind of where we're at with this. Now, it's going to be fun to watch. And as you mentioned, last week we had what many writers called fireworks between Kalshi's attorney and representative on the other side. And that's good. We want the healthy conversation, whether it's at a committee setting in a legislature, a conference talking about gambling issues, or, on your podcast. We love to have those conversations. But that is right now a real issue in the U.S. And you're going to see this litigation's not done. It's only going to get more contentious. And I think the recent ruling could throw a wrench into things.
Is there a place for these prediction markets or prediction businesses in a regulated gambling space? I think, and again, I hope I'm not getting this wrong, but I think people like Chris Grove and Alexander Kane from Sport Trade, they've come out and said there's some merit here, and we've heard, I think a couple of the major operators have looked at buying prediction businesses. I just wonder if is there room for that, or does it somehow work in a regulated marketplace?
Well, I think that's the proper process, and Alex always makes the point the barrier of entry into states now for companies like his is insurmountable. So I don't disagree with him, and so I think the approach is to go state by state like many others do and try to get into the regulated realm. But right now what they're doing is, on the political whims of the CFTC. But here's a question going forward, Steve, which is, I think, unique to the situation. Say Kalshi's successful in their litigation and they move forward. Okay, what happens when another president is elected and on the political whims, you have somebody else leading the CFTC and you're kind of stuck to the political winds? That's not a good thing. Don't you want something where you can say this is in place by statute and it's going to be something that's protected for many years? From a business model perspective, I would opt for protection, even though it may take longer, than relying on who you're able to hire in a short time span and tied to the presidency through the CFTC. That doesn't get talked about, but I think that's a real issue.
And Shawn, actually, sorry, Steve, I just want to say one thing real quick. Where is it going to go next? Like what's the next? So we're talking about sports wagering right now, sports betting, but what's to say that something can't come along the lines of it impacting the iCasino space too? So this is something that it's really important that we define now, to Shawn's point, and just not have it be in chaos. And because uncertainty is going to cause chaos and disruption in business. It's inevitable. We're seeing this all over the world right now, given the political climate that's going on. So we don't want uncertainty in a space that everybody needs to be unified in their approach to get regulated gambling to move forward.
I just want to mention that Dustin Gauker has been really, really good on the whole prediction markets and Kalshi and his Closing Line newsletter. So again, if you're not a subscriber to the Closing Line, I'd strongly recommend doing so. I'll ask you both of you here, and either one of you can weigh in, or both of you. But I just wonder, the markets now with these prediction markets where it's just not sports. It looks now there's going to be a little bit more leeway when it comes to U.S. elections on what you can bet on, and I think there was one of the markets that had the CEO from the guy who was caught at the Coldplay concert with his HR manager this week, where there was some kind of prediction market on that. Is there a danger in that, or is that just having a bit of fun and basically like a different kind of prop bet than we see at the Super Bowl? Yeah. What color the Gatorade's going to be?
I think it's a valid point. Where's the line in the sand? We don't have one. I brought that point up last week at the conference. There's no line in the sand. And do we get to the point where people are going to be threatened? And we've seen this issue in sports betting in general, where players are getting threatened at the college level, and we've put laws in place. Like, are we going to start betting on things that could put somebody in danger? I mean, that's, to me, clearly a line in the sand that needs to be drawn. But to your point, Steve, what's next? We don't know. And how far are they going to infringe? Right now, it starts with, you can bet on who's going to win the game, and then it's going to turn into, are we going to bet on props next? I mean, how far are we going to go with this? The political stuff, I don't have a real problem with. Like, we had it available for one day in West Virginia, oddly enough, Steve, years ago. I believe FanDuel offered it, and they called me up because the governor was not happy about it. And he said, no way are we going to allow this, and they pulled the market. And then the Wall Street Journal called me and said, what are your thoughts on this? And I said, look, if the guy down the street wants to bet $50 on who's going to be president, it's not going to, change an election. They act like we already have billions of dollars flowing through our election process, much of it dark money. So don't tell me that betting on this process is going to, influence it whatsoever. So that's I think that's going to be here to stay. But this other stuff outside of that realm walks into the dangerous waters.
I'm just curious. Do you fellas have a thought on, like, is the Donald Trump administration, is it a good thing for regulated gambling or a bad thing?
Shawn.
Oh, okay. So,
you go for it.
Way to pass the buck, Saam.
Well, without not giving my opinions of the president, I will say that his demeanor thus far has been, states are going to take more responsibility on themselves, and the federal government's not going to be there for them. Take FEMA, for example. Okay, that's an example of. So that tells me, as a lawmaker, if you're a lawmaker, how do we raise new revenue? Because we're going to have to do that. Now, the old way of doing it was raising taxes. But guess what happens, Steve, when you just raise taxes? You probably are out of office the next election. So you have to come up with creative ways. Is there a better bill out there than iGaming to raise new revenue to, without raising taxes, and then also protect the consumer, and also do it in a short time manner? You don't have to go build the infrastructure. It's almost like flipping a switch. So there's the ability to go online quickly and derive new revenue without raising taxes is an exciting opportunity for all lawmakers. And I do think the Trump administration could be a catalyst for that, simply because they're sending the message to states that you're on your own in many areas. And that's going to put budgets in a crisis, and that's going to cause change. So to your point, I do think it could be a good thing.
Well, also, one of the things that we just saw with the passage of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act as well is direct impact in the United States on the way gambling is taxed. So I'm sure a lot of people already know, but just to go over it again, they changed in the U.S. the W2G threshold to 2,000 when the American Gaming Association was asking for 5,000. It went up from the previous $1,199.99, and it's still not enough to combat what inflation should have been. It needs to be much higher. And also the new way that gambling is now taxed, where no matter how much you lose, 10% of all your winnings are going to be taxable. I don't want to make any assumptions or insinuations, but there's a interesting timing to this when Kalshi is trying to do what they're doing, And this very unfavorable tax measure was just put in place that's going to impact gamblers.
Hey, Shawn, what you said earlier, I think one failing of the Ontario government, and I know the Attorney General of the province, Doug Downey, was at your conference, is that they haven't told that story. The province, for the most part, gets high praise for launching regulated gambling, having 50 operators. The Alcohol and Gaming Commission, they get plaudits, it seems, globally for how they implement this marketplace. But the government's done a lousy job, and in fact, really hasn't told the story of what they've done with the tax money. And to what you said, I think there's a good story to tell, especially if that money was being steered towards public health or addiction programs. And to me, it's a lesson learned, something I think Alberta can learn from, but other jurisdictions moving forward, is that I think you need to tell people what's happening with that tax revenue. And let's face it, guys, gambling is a vice industry, and that's a story that probably needs to be told.
100%. Look, transparency on where the money goes is vital in messaging and to the consumer that and in West Virginia, I can tell you, we put it in one big pot and we know exactly where it's going, whether it's for elderly homes, but primarily for our education system. It helps fund what we call the Promise Scholarship, which allows West Virginia students to go to universities within the state at a dramatically reduced rate. And that was, quite frankly, when I was progressing iGaming legislation or sports betting legislation, was top level conversation I was having with people is we need to make sure the Promise Scholarship is fully funded. Do you want to keep a black market that's thriving and they're taking money from the Promise Scholarship, or do you want to regulate it and at the same time protect consumers? So that's the messaging that I'm sending to lawmakers as well. Right? Every state you go into, if you're in Georgia, for example, they have what's called the Hope Scholarship, and gambling revenue goes to that. So in many states, in Maryland, Ohio, it goes to programs that are vital for consumers and for the public at large. Like you said, it's a public health issue. And if you could derive the revenue and send it places that we know are in need, that actually boosts not just the economy, but the overall health of your constituents, then that's a winner. But you're absolutely right, Steve. You have to message that, and people need to know where the money goes. And we have commercials on a regular basis in my state that tells you if you're playing West Virginia lottery games, it's going to fund these things. And that's part of the education process to the consumer.
Yeah, and I think that's been a real good story for the Provincial Lottery and Gaming Association or corporations to tell, guys, where organizations like OLG and BCLC, they tell those stories of sponsoring entertainment programs or helping build a new community center in a small town in Ontario. So I think that's a marketing vehicle that's been very productive or very effective for those lottery and gaming corporations. Hey, just want to get your thoughts too, guys, just quickly on the Nickel G conference as well. As there was a real another kind of fireworks infused panel with John Pappas and trying to remember Shannon McCracken from Churchill Downs. And it just seems, Saam, a bit strange that we're still having this conversation about cannibalization. And it almost feels to me that it's a different story depending on where you're standing on the border. If you're in Canada, I think people seem to understand that cannibalization, it really isn't a thing. In the U.S., it seems to still be something that's seen as a black mark on the online gaming industry.
Well, I, to your point, I still can't believe we're having these conversations either. I think it's been proven to be a myth. I mean, for instance, in the state of Pennsylvania in the U.S., 4 casinos have opened up since the passage of iGaming. And what the brick and mortar establishments are doing that have the online vertical, they're taking the money that they make from iGaming, reinvesting into their brick and mortar facilities, adding new amenities, new restaurants, new bars, and really driving increased revenue that way. So they're using that money to reinvest in themselves, and they're going to grow their brick and mortar business as a result. That's the path forward. And I think everybody is trying to paint their own narrative that best suits them in this argument. But facts are the facts at the end of the day. And there's a reason why major corporations like MGM have their BetMGM brand. Caesars have their online casino, even though they're a major brick and mortar player. So I think the evidence is all you need right there.
Yeah, it's basically a political talking point at this point. And John Pappas is my guy. He's a good friend, and he's a hell of an advocate for the industry. But, Steve, that goes back to kind of what I discussed earlier is there's industry infighting, and that's a prime example of it. You have one end, you have opposition in some states by the same players who go in and get an iGaming license as soon as it goes live. So they'll oppose it in one state, then they'll participate in the market and when it goes live. So, that's a bit of hypocrisy on my end where I come from. But that's what we're fighting within the industry itself. But the data is clear. In iGaming states, all revenues are going up. They're going up for everybody. A rising tide raises all ships, not just the yachts. And that's what's happening right now with iGaming.
Yeah, I think it just forces you to be better, guys. I mean, it's the sports, entertainment, culture, arts industry is highly, highly competitive, just like the restaurant industry right now. So you've got to keep pushing the envelope and coming up with new products and new ways to get people.
Yep.
And I think it's still a challenge in today's digital technology, AI, whatever you want to call the world, where it's harder to get people to get the venue. So you've got to offer a good product, but it's possible. I mean, we see NHL arenas in the Stanley Cup playoffs that are packed, and you still got 100,000 people that go to Churchill Downs for the Kentucky Derby. It just means you have to work at it.
And Steve, you're exactly right. Why aren't these companies seeing this as a player acquisition model? I mean, go look at that casino floor. You need to recruit some new people. Okay, you need to recruit some new people, and iGaming allows you to have a player acquisition model that didn't exist before, and that's the data we have available. So I don't get the opposition. Obviously, it's all mostly political. It's not based on facts or reality or data, and that's the position that some people are willing to take. But as Saam mentioned, many companies are seeing the real world here and realizing it's time to get in on the ground floor and accept iGaming as the partnership that it is.
Hey guys, last question. First for you, Saam. Is there any heads up you can give us with regards to what Play and Go is doing in Canada coming up, or is there focus for you here right now?
Well, we're focusing on what's coming ahead with Alberta, and we're focusing on getting more partners live in Ontario and continuing our phenomenal partnership with Loto-Quebec. These are the main focuses right now, and constantly improving our product, because at the end of the day, that's what matters. We want to make sure that we have the very best product for our players that maximizes safe and responsible gaming. And that's what we're going to continuously do and aim for every day. And really just, Steve, thanks for having us on today. And I want to Shawn mentioned this as well, that we have so many great partners in Canada, Paul Burns, Amanda Brewer, Troy Ross, that all our friends deserve the shout outs, and we're so appreciative, because Shawn and I aren't Canadians ourselves. So one of the things that we've tried to do, I think, and Shawn, I don't want to speak for you on this, but I think we've been more listening to what's needed in Canada as we're moving forward and forming our partnerships. And I think that's what's going to help us at the end of the day, listening to the experts, seeing what we can do to help the market as non-Canadians and support the Canadian industry as a whole.
Yeah, and I just wonder, Shawn, you as someone who's based in West Virginia, just what you're learning or what you're taking away from Canada, and also in terms of I know you're not at home for very long. What's next for you?
Well, we're continuing to be a leader and leading from the front on the conversations that are happening around player protections, and being in the front of the line after the G7. Look, that was an incredible opportunity, not just for Play and Go, but for the industry as a whole. And now that we're going to take that to the United Nations, and that Play and Go is the supplier, we're at the front of the line on this, because we're not afraid to have those conversations. And we're open to regulatory processes, and we are open to building those relationships. And I think that's been missing in the industry as a whole for many years. And we're going to close that education gap. We're going to work together and try to move this industry forward, because it is part of the global economy. It's not just province by province, state by state. It is happening throughout the global economy. We are digitized. Data is the new currency, And we realize that, and we're going to work with all stakeholders to make sure that a sustainable entertainment model is the one that wins out and goes forward. Now, talking about those relationships in Canada, and Saam shouted out all of our friends, I have to say this, Steve. There's something that happened at the G7 that he's going to kill me if he listens to this about Paul Burns. But Paul Burns, Steve, I kid you not, saved our colleague's life. We were at dinner, and a colleague of ours started choking. And Paul Burns, and Paul is not a small guy, and he'll tell you that, Burns, he's not a small guy. He's at the end of the table, and our colleague started choking. Burns said, stand up and bend over, gave him the Heimlich maneuver, and saved his life. I have to give him a shout out because Paul will never say that on his own. He'll never take credit for it. It was his birthday last week, and he didn't even want to tell us it was his birthday. So I made sure I got in front of everybody and told them it was his birthday just to give him some embarrassment shock there. But, he's a hell of a guy. I wanted to share that story, Steve, because it was a scary story for a few seconds, and then Paul Burns stepped up to the plate. I've never seen that before, ever, where that situation happened. But shout out to Paul Burns.
I'm gonna give him hell when next time I talk to him, Shawn, because I had him on the podcast at the end of the Canadian Gaming Summit. He didn't mention that. But he's a man of many skills. Hockey coach, head of the Canadian Gaming Association, and now a first responder. So you're right. Paul Burns does it all. Hey, that's Shawn Fluharty, the head of government affairs for Play and Go. Saam Hafezi as the regional director North America. Hey guys, really good to catch up. I know we tried to do this during the Canadian Gaming Summit. We ran into some scheduling and technical difficulties, but. Always grateful for you guys to come on the podcast.
Steve, thank you so much. We really appreciate you having us on.
Thanks, Steve. Good seeing you as always.
That's it for this episode of the Gaming News Canada show. As always, you can find us on Substack at gamingnewscanada.ca and also on the various podcast platforms. If you are interested in sponsoring or advertising with Gaming News Canada, you can reach out to me, Steve, at gamingnewscanada.ca. Again, thanks so much to Saam Hafezi and Shawn Fluharty for joining me on the podcast today, and we will see everybody again very soon.